Okay, welcome to another week of Hard Hat Brigade and our live stream. I'm Secure This Now, also known as Mr. Bill, and joined by, yes, the illustrious Monkey Dragon. We kind of run the loosely organized group of people that we call Hard Hat Brigade, although we're not really an organization, right? All right. Well, I do need to do a sound check though, just to be safe. So bear with me for a split second. I'm going to ask Monkey Dragon to talk aimlessly while I check the stream.
Really enjoy it for sure.
Well, it looks like nobody was able to hear you there, but everybody was able to hear me because I had the wrong selection.
Oh,
All right, but we can hear you now.
oh,
Do you
good.
wanna do a respin of that for the
Sure.
folks at home?
Yeah. So we were, let's say, Mr. Bill and I were just talking about some future ideas for episodes down the road, and some interesting things I think are going to be coming up here probably after DEF CON. I got a handful of people that I think would be really fun to bring on and get their ideas on what might be a fun way to look at spinning the idea of what's possible with a hard hat brigade kind of take on, you know, various things. So look forward to that.
Yeah, and if you're out there and you're watching us, you can bring your hard hat onto our stream and
Bring it.
share it with the world. In addition to us, going out and recruiting folks, we're always open to other hard hat enthusiasts who want to join us to talk about hard hats. So I guess I'll jump right into it. Our topic this week is going to cover power. How do you power your hard hat? And with that comes some discussion about cabling,
Hmm.
and we'll share some tips and tricks, and Monkey Dragon will show you his fancy bit of kit
Ah,
for
yes.
how he does his cabling, because I'll tell you, fit and finish for his cabling is top notch.
Well, getting there.
You're too humble, man. You're too humble.
Sure.
I aspire to have cabling that's as good as yours, to be
It
honest.
comes from the custom PC stuff.
So when we're talking about power, you've probably heard us say things talk about, power on the hat, or the what we like to call the miner's option, which is cabling that goes from your hat down the back to an external power pack. And,
Mhm.
you know, I think it's worth noting that when you're planning your hard hat and you're trying to figure out how to power it, for me, I've tried to keep it, somewhat simple. There's a lot of ways to do exotic power, but sticking with something like USB, for if you're not too, you know, too advanced in developing your own power options, USB provides a lot of capability. I think there's a few things that everybody should know about USB is
Mm.
there's multiple amounts of power that can be provided by USB. If you look at the USB spec, for example, there are limits to how much power can be delivered to a USB device, and
Right.
these USB portable battery packs that we have nowadays are really handy for this. But there is a weight penalty. So if you go with the mining rig option where you have a cable going down the back, this brick is going to fit comfortably in your pocket or in a fanny pack or a backpack. But if you're looking for power on your hat, you're going to have to start sacrificing maybe runtime for weight. Now, USB, of course, nominally is providing 5 volts of power. One of the challenges I've had personally is especially if you're dealing with Pi, the more modern Pis use more power than before. But I've also overloaded a Pi 2 with a Wi-Fi adapter, for example, an alpha Wi-Fi adapter, which is the high power Wi-Fi adapter, and you can get into a situation where the Pi will complain. It will say something to the effect of under voltage. It'll give you some console messages before. Well, it may or may not give you console messages before it either reboots or just shuts itself off. Of course, that's not optimum. That's why you want to make sure that you have an adequate enough. So you have an adequate amount of power that you're providing. And when we're talking about power, I mean, we're talking about current, right? So voltage is going to be fixed for USB. It's going to be 5 volts nominally for a USB type A, like a brick like this. And the current is measured in milliamps or amps. And I should have gotten it out. I did not prepare, obviously, for this. I have one of those little USB power meters. I think it was $15 on Amazon. Do you have one handy or?
Yeah, let me go grab mine. I'll be right back.
Okay.
But of course, I don't have battery packs, so let me see if I can grab something.
You don't have to run and get it. I mean, I have it here in my tool kit. I was gonna, it would just require me to dig around a little bit, but. One of the things you want to do is you want to test out your kit and see what kind of runtime you're going to get. Runtime is, of course, going to be dependent on how many things you plug into your Pi, the type of power that you're using, right? So most of these are rated by milliamp hours, and you can kind of get a feel for how long your device will run based off of the milliamp hours. Now, this is a Moco power pack that I got off of Amazon. This is probably one of the oldest ones I have, and it says it can provide 5 volts DC at 2 amps. It also can provide DC 5 volts, 3.1 amps total. And if I remember correctly, because it has 2 ports on it, it has a 2 amp port and it has a 1.2 amp port, which combines to 3.2 amps. Now it says the capacity is 9,000 milliamp hours. If you are dealing with stuff from China and it's not a name brand, you could run into a situation where it'll say 9,000 milliamp hours, but when you test it, it might actually only give you 3,000 milliamp hours, for example. I have had situations like that with some maybe no-name type of battery packs. So like this one here, this was a $10 special from Office Depot.
Très bien.
Yeah. So it's thin, it's light, and that's another thing you can tell by the packaging. Most of the time, these thicker battery packs like this contain 18650 cells with some circuitry. So this one's the 9,000 milliamp hour. I have an Anker or Anker, however you want to say it, 13,000 milliamp hour, which looks like it's got 3 18650s in it. It's hefty. But I don't know. Do you use Anker power?
Yeah, I actually have a couple of their 20,000 milliamp hour packs. The Anker stuff has worked really well. They've been pretty trustworthy. I haven't had any issues with them. Their cables are also pretty good, and they're braided as far as like external, so they don't tend to kink up and things like that. So those are something to consider, especially if you're looking for like the miner's setup where you're running cables down your back, and you don't want them to get tangled up on things. And a big thing that kind of came up on a previous episode was to really consider the length of the cables too, because you want to be able to take them off easily, and having it tethered can complicate things.
Yeah, and stress relief, of
Hmm.
course, is another aspect. So this smaller, thinner battery pack, I mean, you can see how thin it is. That tells me that it's most probably contains a lithium polymer battery, although it says lithium ion, which could be a thin lithium ion. It says it's rated for an output of DC 5 volts, 1 amp, and it is 4,000 milliamp hours. Now, I've been able to run a Pi Zero with this. I didn't do I didn't do what I would call a timed run to see how long it would last. I do know that when I've tried it with anything smaller than or bigger than a Pi Zero, uh, it's not enough. And even though the Pi 2 is pretty lean on power, on startup, there's this like peak as it starts up, and then it settles down to 480 milliamp hours, which is half of the rated capacity. But that initial bump, and then of course any accessories that you add. So if you're plugging in multiple Wi-Fi adapters, an
Hmm.
SDR, a GPS, if you're using the GPIO pins to drive lighting, things of that nature, these all go into your total power budget. So you're going to kind of learn to not only add up all of the milliamp hours that your stuff is going to burn, but you should also test on run times if you're going to be running off power.
Hmm.
So I have those are the power banks that I have, and I mentioned 18650s, and I can't remember. Did you run 18650s on
Not
anything?
yet. I've been wanting to do one with some 18650s and then some sort of like power distribution board, because I think it'd be a little bit fun to play around with things that have different running on different voltages. So we'll get into talking about things like buck converters and whatnot, I think a little bit later on the show here. But considering the power consumption needs on startup, if your total power envelope allows for all units to run, consider staging at different points starting up your devices to, like if you have a cooling fan or a lighting system, start those up in sequence later down the road, and that might help. If you find that you're just underneath that kind of starvation point. So I would probably run something that's got more overhead, but sometimes living on the dangerous side can be a little fun.
Yeah, I think starvation point's probably a good way to describe it. I've certainly had my share of problems where I plug something in and then the Pi like reboots or crashes, and I'm like, what just happened? And initially you're probably used to plugging things in your computer, and if it crashes, you think there's something wrong with the USB device, or there's something wrong with the OS. It's most probably, if it's a Pi or some single board computer like that, you also need to look at power, because
Hmm.
yeah, if you don't if you aren't able to incrementally power things on, then or if you didn't plan for it, you could end up overwhelming overwhelming things. So when we talk about 18650s, we're talking about these cells. They're very popular with the vaping community because most vapors use these in their mods. These batteries are rechargeables. They are lithium ion, and there's a wide range of manufacturers for these.
Hmm.
I the they're very useful from a utility perspective because if you get the ones that have the what do you call it, the protection,
Yes,
circuit
protection circuits.
protection,
Yeah.
then I mean they're a little bit thicker. That's why this one has this green shrink wrap around it. But what it does is it will not allow this cell to exceed the capabilities of the cell itself, because
Hmm.
unprotected cells, if you overcharge them or you discharge them too rapidly,
Hmm.
that's leads to heat, leads to fire, leads to unintended consequences
Right.
on your head,
Yeah.
which
Yeah. And those tend to hold up a little bit better to that kind of, I think, activity than say like those lithium polymer packs, which can, you know, we've all seen the dreaded moment when somebody's laptop all of a sudden deploys its airbags because the batteries decided to puff up. So, yeah, having that safety circuit on there to prevent it from overvolting or undervolting significantly can be a good thing, especially if you're going to wear them.
yeah, and I think from a charging perspective, you need to be cognizant of how you're charging these things. If you're not, I mean, 18650s, I like it because I can pull them out. I can put them in a separate charger slash battery conditioner. I have I have a tiny little drone that's off the shelf. It uses lipo batteries, and it has a little charging circuit where you plug it in and it just cuts itself off it when it reaches a certain voltage. Not the best charger, right? Because it doesn't. There's nothing intelligent about it.
Hmm.
But I mean, 18650 is pretty stable. I haven't heard of anybody having any real problems with them, and that's why they're so popular with the vaping community, because I want to say they're pushing, and it pushes a lot of power, like
Right.
10 amps or something, 8 to 10
Yeah, they
amps.
they do really well. The capacity is pretty good, and and it's a known shape too. Like you can work around the size and the weight because it's things that you can look up very easily. So that can be helpful in a project.
Yeah, and they actually have other packages that are similar. There's a slightly larger one. I think it's called the 2900 or something.
That
I
sounds
have
about right.
Yeah, I
Yeah, I
haven't
don't know
looked
those
into it.
numbers.
So the challenge is, of course, I don't want anybody to spend a lot of money. I don't want to spend a lot of money on this stuff. So the 18650 is pretty ubiquitous. So it's definitely easy to get a hold of,
Hmm.
and the there's a lot of people have a lot of experience with them. So one year, for example, at Layer One, they had a badge that used 18650s, and they had purchased batteries in bulk, and you know, I think it was called Surefire. I should try and find that battery because
Yeah, Surefire, like it was something with fire in it, and it's great too because they were like silver and red colored wrapping on the cells as well. So it's
I
kind of like,
feel
ooh,
like
rapid fire sounds about right.
Rapid Fire was another one, but Surefire was like everybody was joking about it because they're saying, "Oh yeah, I do have it right here." Everybody was joking about it because they're like, "Oh, is this for sure going to light on fire?" And the answer is yes. Now they actually didn't have any challenges with these things catching on fire. They just were not. Oh, Ultra Fire is this one.
Oh, even
It's
better.
just the rating, the milliamp hour rating on this. This is a 6,000 milliamp hour rated battery.
Oh,
Well, I should say it's not necessarily rated. It's what they say it was.
right.
And there's a couple different things about this battery in particular that you can tell. If you look at this one, which is a Panasonic 18650, it is rated for 3,400 milliamp hours. So the fact that this company that labels theirs Ultrafire, they're saying they can get nearly twice the capacity than what a Panasonic battery can. Well, it turns out that's just a lie. I think
Hmm.
they meant 600 milliamp hours.
Yeah, they were significantly lower in capacity on those packs. They worked fine on the badge, but yeah, for sure, those the well-regarded name brand ones, the Panasonics, the Samsungs. There are a few other really good brands out there for the 18650s. I want to say they're usually in that like 2500 to 3500 milliamp hour rating. And one thing to note whenever you're working with any of these batteries is, especially if you're building a pack or putting them together, it's best to test them, and you want the capacities and the voltages. Well, maybe the voltages for sure. They need to be really close to each other. You want to ensure your safety, and that's fairly important, especially with the lithium polymer ones, because you can cause a lot of problems and put yourself in a world of hurt if something goes bad.
I agree. I totally I don't even like mixing brands, right? So I have this one here, which is an LG. I believe it's an HG2. One thing you will notice too on these 18650s is, and I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but there's little slots in the top, and those are vents. Those are safety vents. So if this battery was to overheat and to the point where it needs to exhaust gas or whatever, instead of blowing up, it will vent out of the top of this battery. This one just has a simple button which does not vent to anything. So again,
Ultra fire.
ultra fire, yeah. In fact, I don't even know why I'm still holding on to this. I should turn it into for recycling. And also, I mean, I I have my whoops. What's that? Oh, duh. I have multiple cases. I also like to transport them in a case, in a plastic case, so that they're not bouncing around, touching
Hmm.
other batteries, because they are high. These are high current output batteries. Like I said, I mean they're 8 to 10 amps. I think. I should look up the ratings, but it's a lot of oomph, which is good because that's how I'm powering all this, right?
Hmm.
And and I guess that kind of leads me into the next topic, which is how do we take 3.7 volts and make it worthwhile? So the way that I do it on here is I've got this whole battery holder, and you have two ways you can connect your batteries. You can connect them in series, which is similar to this, where you have negative, positive to negative, and then positive. So when you put them in series and you have two 3.75 volt, this is just for example, I would never put these batteries together, but then you end up with 7.4 volts. Now, here's the little trick. These are not, they're nominally rated for 3.7 volts. When you charge them, they get up around 3.94. I think I had one that went to 4.1.
Yeah, I think they get up there for 142.
So
They're really the high quality.
yeah, so they're supposed to provide at least 3.7 volts across, a range, right? We're talking about average. But when you put them in series, it's additive. So 3.7 plus 3.7 is 7.4. So you'll have 7.4 volts, right? You have the negative lead here, positive lead here. If you put them in parallel, where you connect like the negative goes to the negative side of your input and the positive goes to the positive side of your input, what that does is parallel is the situation where the voltage stays the same, but it can push more current. Now that means this will still be 3.7 volts, but because it's pushing 3.7 volts out of the top of both of these, you can use it. It will handle higher current typically. For our purposes, you don't need more current than what one of these can provide. So
Hmm.
it's almost better to put them in series. Now, why is that important? Well, the difference is you're either because like I said, I'm using USB as a standard, because the Pi is powered by a micro USB or now a Type C USB,
Hmm.
which
Right.
is a whole different game. I think JRWR is looking into, I think, what did he say, 12 volts?
Yeah, he was looking at 12. So yeah, because I mean, as you're pushing more voltage, you can drop the required current for similar power output. So that can change a lot of things depending upon what you're running. So yeah.
So what you end up doing is you end up getting one of these little power converters. Now this one's pretty tiny, and you have to pay attention to output on these too. Now the
Hmm.
input range on this, it's called a buck converter. They're pretty cheap on Amazon, but cheap doesn't necessarily mean great.
Hmm.
You need to check the input voltage, and then you need to verify the output voltage. Now this has a USB Type A connector on it, which USB Type A outputs 5 volts. It's not going to push any more than that. Input voltage, though, is actually pretty key. So the reason why I got that buck converter, well, actually that's not the original. I kind of cut the other one on fire, but that's a whole different story. Monkey Dragon was there for that. All right, let's talk
We
about
avoided disaster. It
let's
was
talk about
fine.
safety, right? Always double check the polarity of your batteries before you plug them in, because
Right.
what happened to me was I had the polarity reversed on one of the batteries, and what it ended up doing was pushing a bunch of current through the voltage converter that I had, because the way that I had it wired was the opposite of how the batteries were plugged in. And remember how I
Hmm.
was saying these are high current, the 18650s? Yeah, I let the magic smoke out. Like,
Luckily, it was just the voltage converter. It actually
oh,
saved everything. That was yeah.
that was an experience because I wasn't paying attention. Guilty. And Monkey Dragon's like, smoke, smoke,
Smoke.
smoke. Like, because he didn't know why it was smoking. He didn't know that I had just put the batteries in. He just knew there was smoke coming off of my helmet, which I luckily did not have on my head yet. And
Right.
then I looked down and realized, yes, it is in fact smoking. Pulled the batteries and realized I had one of them backwards. So clearly mark everything.
Hmm.
Know what you're doing. Verify things before you get too far down the road. Now,
Right.
the voltage converter that I selected, it takes between I think they advertise it between 3 and 22 volts and outputs 5 volts. So that's a pretty big range. 3 to 22 volts is pretty good. So
Hmm.
I could run my batteries in parallel, which would give me 3.7 volts in, or I could run them in series, which would give me 7.4 volts in and 5 volts out. And with experimentation, I realized that I got about an extra 20 to 30 minutes of extra runtime by placing them in series. So pushing in 7.4 volts worked out a lot better than pushing 3.7 in. And I think it's because when they're in parallel, if one cell's lower than the other, then it just it's doesn't even things out. Unlike when they're in series, the converter only sees power from the one part of the loop of
Hmm.
7.4 volts going in. So that's something to consider. Now, I did have to solder on the leads, so that's another thing that you'll have to be cognizant of. And if you want to, I mean, there's nothing stopping you from using a powered USB
Hmm.
hub. Just understand that if you have a powered USB hub that you're powering and you have separate power for something like a Pi that's plugged into that, you need, like the auxiliary parts of the USB are plugged into that. You need to be careful about what they call backfeeding. So where backfeeding is where if I have a powered USB hub the part that normally takes the input is normally coming from a computer, and then it's adding power with a an external power supply, right? Nominally 12 volts or something. But then the USB ports themselves have power on them. So if you were to plug that into, say, a, a Pi that is not expecting power to come into it, so that it can talk to other things, then, and I'm talking about these USB ports, you could end up cooking your Raspberry Pi's USB ports, and that's
Yep.
called backfeeding. That's a very simplified explanation of it. I would just be careful if you are using a powered USB hub. Totally worth using in a lot of applications. So once we figured out, we're going to use USB or not, now we need to cable it all up. So let's talk about cabling.
Cables are fun. One last thing before we go over to cables, talking about the buck converters, they come in a ton of different sizes, as we'd hinted at. Here's one right here that steps up to 5 volt. I actually use this on an FPV headset to power a piece of hardware from the LiPo pack that's inside of it. So they come super small. This is from a brand Pololu. They work really well, fairly inexpensive. As you look at different types of buck converters, you're going to want to also consider the efficiency. This one has a fairly small range for where it'll step up to 5 volts, contrary to the wide range one that Mr. Bill spoke about earlier. So look at your application and see which one fits your power needs. And, you can probably add a little bit more runtime, trying to sort out which kind of step up or step down, or just a multi input converter to give you that power. So
Yeah,
something to think about.
yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned it, and I apologize. I kind of hedged around it. You not only input is important, but the output. Like I found a lot of buck converters that when you get down and you read the specifications, it turns out they only push 1 amp, right? So you can hook it to a 10 amp power source for 12 or even more. Like for example, if it's the 12 volts off of your car, you could totally power. I mean, there's a lot of capability there, right? I mean, a car's system provides 10, 15, 20 amps across a car normally. That doesn't mean you're going to get that out of the buck converter. The converter itself is rated for a certain output. So pay close attention to that. If you need more power, 2 amp, 3 amp, I think this one here that I have is only rated for 2 amps, but I'm running a Pi Zero and a pretty lightweight Wi-Fi adapter, and the screen, which uses a little bit of power, but just be cognizant of that as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to get that in there. When you're looking at trying to really lean up and kind of fine tune a specific build, that's one of the kind of graceful points with the miner setup. We're running it off of a USB battery pack because the delivery portion's sorted. As long as you've got a good quality battery pack, good quality cables, then it kind of simplifies things. It just, depending upon how much weight you're considering, that might be a part of it. But yeah, power's fun and can be dangerous too.
Definitely can be dangerous. All right, so tell us. I'm going to kick this over to Monkey Dragon because I've been blathering about power so much. Let's talk about how to make it all connect and look pretty. Because I'll be honest with you, and I'm anxious to learn from Monkey Dragon as well. Because if you look at this USB connection here, those are zip ties. I just soldered it on the back. I mean, it's pretty ugly. And I would love to tidy up my hat with some kick-ass
It still looks good though.
cabling. Oh, and I did find my USB
Yes.
power
Yeah, those
jacket.
are pretty inexpensive. They have nice bright OLED displays on them.
Yeah.
Super flexible. Very, very helpful.
It is called a USB digital tester. I got it on Amazon. It's like $14.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There seems to be more than one variation of the exact same thing. I don't even know if I got the same listing that you did, and it appears to work
So I'm really
well.
anxious to learn about cabling, because one of the things that I did was I went and I got one of these pretty ribbon cable and pin kits.
Oh yeah.
As you can see, it's largely unused because I haven't suckered Monkey Dragon into giving me a lesson yet. So
Oh well.
tell us about cabling, because
Well,
this is good
cabling.
stuff.
Cabling. I mean, you have tons of different options for cabling. I'm going to go and switch over to another camera, and it's probably going to freak out for a second, but let's switch over. So you got a lot of different options. I actually picked up this guy here, which has got a handful of colors. Can be nice. This is it's flexible too, which is nice. I think it's a nice silicone sleeving around it, and that helps a lot, because you figure when you're working with an object that's got a lot of curvature to it, having a pliable cable can be really helpful. It's multi-stranded, so if you need something that holds its shape, these ones might not work so well for you. So that's something to consider. But as we look at some of the other things on here, we can see I've got, it's good to have a nice flush cut side trimmer or something along the lines like that. This is just a Hako branded one. Works really well. Fairly inexpensive too for nice quality ones without going overboard, because you can really go overboard on the tools. This guy right here is actually what I use to make my custom cables for my PC, as well as some of the cables that I've made for my hard hats. Last year, I had custom cables running from the GPIO pins on the Pi into the hard hat and then back out to, I don't even remember where they went to, but I kind of helped with cleaning things up. So you'll see I've got a multitude of things sitting around here. So let's just kind of dive into this, I guess. I'm just going to cut a small length of cable off of here. So we're going to grab this little blue guy here and strip a little bit of cable off, or a little bit of the shielding off. You only need probably a few millimeters worth here. So something along those lines. You may or may not be able to make that out, and depending upon how this focus is going to work, because it's not autofocus, you may not tell, but it's about 2 millimeters worth on there. And these guys here, I'm trying to remember what specifically these were for, but actually, before I get too far ahead, so very similar kit to what Mr. Bill showed. We've got both male and female pins in this kit. And what we've got here is a variation of sizes for the different socketed ends. So we have little single open ones all the way up to ones with 12 pins. So lots of options here with regards to how you can do your cables. So I'm going to go ahead and pull one of these guys off of here, and we'll actually just terminate it straight on. And this should be interesting, because I have no idea how this is going to look under the camera. So what you may or may not be able to see on here, let me see. I'm going to move over to the other camera and see if we can get it to focus on it. So this little pin's got a couple of triangulated pins that will actually bite into the cable itself, into the shielded part of it, and there's a couple of small pins also that will curve into the actual cabling itself, and that's what's going to give you that good positive connection. So this tool, let's see if we can even see it or not. I'm going to see if this will focus on here. So you probably can't make that. Okay, there we go. So you might be able to see somewhat. There's a really thin line, and this is on the top half of the socket in the middle of those valleys. And so it's got a bit of a double lobed shape. And what that's going to help do is it's going to promote those pins to curl in, so that way they get a nice tight grab on the cable and actually insert inside of it, so that way you've got a good positive electrical connection. And we're not going to be soldering these. This is just we're just going to plug these straight in together. So
is that a ratcheting?
yes, good question. So yeah, it does ratchet, actually. And so this guy, what I'll actually do is I'll click it down a couple of clicks, probably about there, just to kind of get this thing going. And there's a correct side to put the cable into. When you pick these first up and you look at them, you'll notice that there's actually two depths of where those kind of curled sections are. So we're going to be putting them in from this side, which is luckily is the size that has the gauge of cables written on. So if you're looking at it, you can read the letters. That's the right way to go in. So we're going to go ahead and put this in, and I will probably take pictures and maybe throw it on Twitter later, because this is a little bit of a challenge. And actually, you know what? I'm going to do something here. One thing that can be helpful, especially on some of these smaller cables, is to take and kind of pinch in. So you may or may not be able to see, but I've actually pinched in the first set of kind of the first side of the elements that grab into the cable to kind of try and hold this thing together as the package. And this is going to allow me to hold it while I insert it into the tool here. And so I'm going to give this a couple of clicks and line this up visually so that I can see these kind of parts lining up with the first side of it. Give it a nice firm squeeze, pull it out, and there's our cable right there. I know, horrible explanation, but I'll do a write-up on it. But the good thing we have here is that we've got a nice strong connection on this cable. I'm pulling pretty hard on it. These are joined together now, and this is nice and clean. And you want to inspect it, make sure things look good. So what we can see on here, might be able to see this actually, is that the wires themselves are held fast by the pin itself. They're dug into the metal, and so we're going to get a nice electrical connection there. And because everything's nice and tidy, we don't have anything sticking out on here, this should insert directly into this socket. We'll get a nice little click, and here's our terminated cable that we can stick on a GPIO pin for our Raspberry Pi. So here's a Pi 3A right here, and let's go ahead and stick it on the 5-volt pin, and now we've got a nice good connection here. And that's pretty much what I did for the hard hat last year. So this tool, I want to say, ran me about $30. There was a slight learning curve to kind of getting to know exactly how far to plunge the connector and the cable into the tool. Until you get that, it's a bit frustrating. So if you do decide to give this a go, hang in there. If you want, DMs are open. You can always hit me up. More than happy to try and provide a little bit more information on it. But it can be super rewarding, because not only are you going to allow yourself to choose a particular aesthetic, case in point, colored cables. I can choose things that are making it really easy for myself so I don't accidentally mix up my polarity. Or maybe you want to just use, like, I don't want to use red and black. I want to use green and blue because that's the colors I have on there. Do it, it's up to you. But making your own cables allows you to also choose your custom lengths too. So it helps with really tidying things up and giving you kind of a cohesive look and feel for everything. So it's fun, it's rewarding, it's a bit taxing. I think I'll do on another episode, or maybe even a write-up, I'll do some custom PC cables and actually show the sleeving process, which
So
is
would you
using
say
these
it's
guys.
would you say it's where you find your zen?
When you're just like kind of doing the cables and you're getting in there, you get into this mode crimping them. Yeah, that part's pretty chill. When you actually do the sleeving part, the tension on the sleeve, or I'll kind of demonstrate. So they're these kind of, they're these braided sleeves. So you can see, much like those finger traps, when you squeeze them together, they get wider. And when you pull them tight, they get thinner. And so, if you happen to also like looking at custom PCs with the high-end systems that people put together that have the custom cables and custom sleeving on there, pulling those sleeves super tight helps tremendously on there, and your fingers get pretty tore up doing that, because there's a couple of ways to go about doing it. So heat shrinks your friend. So this is 3-to-1 heat shrink, so it shrinks by 3 times its size. I use these for my power cables on the PC. And so what I'll actually do is I'll terminate my cables after I've measured it out. And so this goes back to the, checking your polarity, check your measurements, because you're going to be really sad if you make this beautiful cable and you found out that, oh my gosh, you forgot to consider, an extra inch or so of slack because you've got a radius that goes around something. And so, double check. I tend to have a sacrificial piece of wire, the same type of wire that I'm using, and I will lay it out so I know exactly how these cables are going to actually take shape. And I think that's a good tip, because if you just use a piece of string, not that it's wrong or anything, but string lies a lot differently than wiring and cabling. So it's good to use, if you can, use the material you're going to use to take and lay things out. But so cut the cable, cut your shrink wrap. This tool's my friend. It's just a butane torch, but it's kind of nice because it's got a bit of a jet on it, so it actually is pushing hot air out of it, and it gets really hot. So one thing to consider, the heat off of this, like the lighters are not going to put out nearly as much heat, but you might end up burning yourself on accident. This will probably cook you, so maybe the lighters are safer. but that thing's worked out nice, and so you end up, you put your sleeving on there, you got your heat shrink, and what you're doing is you're actually melting the heat shrink. You heat up the heat shrink right at the kind of the joint of the cable on the end, and then you melt the sleeve, and that's what gives it that nice tight fit on there that allows you to pull it tight. And then once you finish making these things, yeah, they're really cool. So yeah, it's kind of zen. It's a lot of effort, but the end product is, it's super rewarding. And I think that's what's really fun about projects like this. You get an opportunity to work on something that speaks you as a person, speaks you as, how do you look at a particular challenge? Like, today's challenge is, how do you power the darn thing? And so, first you have to figure out, do I want to run power on the hard hat, or do I want to run power in my pocket? Because I'm a cargo pants guy. I wear those pockets for utility, and those batteries fit in there. So it works out nice. I think. Oh yeah. So I brought this along. I think I put this together at layer 1 as you were smoking, accidentally smoking that buck converter. So this is actually, it's got a 6-pin socket on this end, and then there are 6 cables here. So it's super useful for, I think, I can't even remember why I put together and why I chose 6, but I think it had to do with probably with something at layer 1 that year. So that's kind of the flexibility. If you want to take on the challenge of making your own cables, well, then you can make connector cables for anything that you're working on. So it's fun. I'll go through the tools that I have here. This crimper tool, these I think flush cut trimmers are nice. These just happen to be Hakos. I have another pair that I bought that's upstairs that, I'll tell you this story. So I was trying to get crafty with changing the length of cables coming off of LiPo batteries. And so it's the battery, right? You can't turn the power off. And there I was, I'll just snip the cable off of there. Well, of course, it's a live power cell, and it arced. And so I got 2 nice gouges in those set of cutters. So make sure you cut those one cable at a time if you're working with a live battery pack.
And
So,
those lipos were not for a hard hat.
oh no,
Yeah.
those are for a quadcopter.
Yeah.
So if you want to hear stories about battery safety, um, talk to your friends that fly drones or multi-rotor helicopters, or even any of the RC guys and gals that are out there. That's a super fun hobby too. Um, you know, one of the people that we know, Vis, flies a drone all the time, and he's got some really cool stuff, and I'm sure he's got great information on that. But battery safety is incredibly important, so we definitely want to stress that. Charging and discharging those battery cells, it can be dangerous.
So one of the things I wanted you to also show folks, my HDMI setup, as you can see. Originally, I was going to terminate all 19 conductors for this short little run to my Pi, which was literally just from here to here. And I thought, oh man, it would be great if I did some custom cabling. But then, of course, it turned out to be a little bit more challenging than that.
Hmm.
But now, I mean, this is a conglomeration of super short HDMI cable, a couple of angled pieces. Monkey Dragon has, I think, the answer for routing HDMI on a hard hat. Do you want to show them that?
Sure, yeah.
Because
So I'll switch over to the
I thought it was
camera,
awesome.
other camera here, and actually JRWR brought this up last time too. So this cable here is just a thin ribbon cable attached to a couple of 90-degree HDMI ends. Cool thing is that much like the ribbon sockets on your Pi, it's just a simple clasp that's pressure fit that attaches on here, and the cable comes off. So this allows you to route it through holes cut in your hard hat and then bring the ends out to where they need to meet. The cool thing about this, the cables you can see really thin. I mean, it's super thin. It can bend around fairly tight radiuses. I actually did have it set at a 90-degree like that, and that's pretty tight. And the connection is sound. I had no issues whatsoever. These are kind of felt backed on one side, not like really loose felt, but it's definitely a fabric, and then it's very shiny in the other. So you've got a side that can accommodate like a double-sided tape to stick to something. But your ends come in different sizes. So you've got full size HDMI, mini, micro, 90-degree, where it's coming out as this one is, where I'm trying to think. It would be like where you would traditionally, let me move back to the other camera, get a closer look at this. So we can see that this guy has that kind of how it's oriented. There are ones where the PCB would actually come out the opposite direction. So you're open to choose whatever angle you need to, straight, 90-degree, flush. You have a ton of options. I would actually like to try soldering something just to see, and just to give you an idea of how close these pins are, if the camera will show it. They are really tightly, I'm not sure if that's going to resolve or not, but they're tightly packed together. So if you really enjoy soldering and you want to give it a challenge or give it a try, I'd say go for it if you have something where you can apply it to. I'm sure one of us will at some point, but that gives you a ton of flexibility to get to where you can mount all your cables inside the hard hat, where you've got a little bit more room, to take and run those. And again, this cable was probably an extra inch or two longer than I needed to make sure I had the stress relief. One, to put it in there, because if it's too tight, you're never going to get it plugged in. So, those are the unfortunate trade-offs that you make at times. But I think they offered this in at least a dozen, maybe not a dozen, but at least a half a dozen to a dozen or so different lengths. So you've got a ton of options.
And that was from Adafruit?
I believe so. Yeah, I think I did order this from Adafruit. I like ordering from them because they're usually pretty quick to get stuff out. Honestly, most of the most of the companies that sell parts for, especially that are Raspberry Pi companies that have all the different, components and accoutrements that you might want to use, are really good about shipping things quickly, and they're nice to work with. I actually had an issue. I bought a display that wasn't working, and the support from the company has been excellent. Things have been a little bit slower just with the world as it is right now. So, I wanted to have ample time for the manufacturer to reach back out, because it's a company in China, and they did eventually reach out, and so I got a couple more things to try. But I mean, the community that that provides all the different things that we all use for these projects are just as supportive as the people that we interact with at DEF CON. So the whole the entirety of the ordering process to the working process, both sides are actually, they've been really good to work with. So yeah, I Adafruit's where I bought that stuff at. It was a long way around.
Well, I mean, in most, I mean, most of the stuff that we're buying is still fairly inexpensive.
Hmm.
And I don't know, it would be nice to see maybe a competitor come up with some flat cabling like that, because that is sweet. I mean, the routing possibilities is just amazing. I don't know how I'm gonna integrate that into one of my newer hats, but we'll see. Some
So
folks,
many options.
yeah, I know some folks have said that I should take my original and modify it, but I think I'm gonna keep my original hat original and
Yeah, it's
retire
the
it at some
OG.
point.
You,
Yeah,
you got it's
if
it's 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 great to talk about, because just like one of the things that has come up many times with not just the hard hats, but with all the different parts of this community. It's a big talking point. It's a way to get people involved that are new to it, that have been doing it for an incredibly long time. That hard hat's a testament to it, because everything's accessible. It can easily be seen by anybody that's looking at it, and so that's. I mean, it was the hard hat that made me go, oh, I need to make one too. So
for
you
me,
know,
I think it's opened my eyes to a lot of different ways to do things like cabling. In fact, just before this call or the stream today, I was helping my son's friend put dash, not, it's not a dash cam, but they have a front and back camera kit for motorcycle, and I was using this kit, although I don't have the fancy crimper, so I had to do it by hand with needle nose pliers, which was,
woo,
yeah, it took a try or two. But had I not seen this, I wouldn't have been able to. I would have been looking at it and been probably done some sort of splice job that didn't look so good. Instead, I was able to make a connector so I can just plug it in and unplug it at will. So yeah, I mean, these things apply to everything, and I think that sleeving, that I never really thought about using it, but because I haven't built a PC in more than a decade, but I can see using that in even just plain black sleeving, like in the car,
mhm.
ham radio stuff that I got. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that I could use it. So I mean, I definitely learned a lot about that.
Yeah, they come in different materials too. The sleeves that I have are, I can't remember exactly what type of plastic, but they're plastic. So you can cut them, you can heat them, and they'll do what they need to do. They're also the paracord style ones as well, if you want a different feel. Um, they're that that portion alone of the custom PC market, and for many other hobbies, is there's a ton of options. You can find just about any pattern or color you can think of, as long as it involves strands of a material being wound into a particular tubular shape. And so there's a ton of options there, and heat shrink too. Like the one that I showed, um, is specific for that application. They come in different sizes, so I would definitely go with the heat shrink that fits the size of the package you're trying to hold fast. Luckily, those kits are fairly available. The ones that are inexpensive are kind of 2 to 1. They'll half in size after applying heat. Like I said, this one was a 3 to 1. There are some that are 4 to 1, so those tend to go up in price. So those are things to consider. So, if you have an application where, you're trying to take and weatherproof a cable to a socket, so you might, you'll use your heat shrink, you'll have your dielectric grease and things like that. So those are all things that kind of marry into, even into this hobby. You think about, we're out there in Vegas. It's really hot, and if you've got a lot of cables that are inside your hard hat, and we're sweating out there. Let's be honest. It's hot. We're gonna sweat. So if you have live wires running through your hard hat and in the interior, and they're not shielded properly, take a double look to make sure. Yeah. See.
Luckily,
so tidy.
this is just running off of a watch cell. It's a couple of LEDs, and my head's not touching that. That's without the suspension system, obviously. But
right. So
I could use some tidying up there.
Oh yeah, and inevitably it's one of those things. Oh, I've got these great ideas. I'm going to do all this stuff, and you get halfway through it, and then DEF CON's 3 days away, and you're doing the rest of it then. And so you're in your hotel room, you're doing the last touches, and you're like, you know what? It's fine. It'll as long as it boots and it works. For this application.
Speaking of which, DEF CON's 2 weeks away. If you are watching this stream, please go and check out the homebrew hardware contest.
Yes.
Although we're not running a Hard Hat Brigade contest this year, Homebrew Hardware, who hosted us last year, allowed us to use their stage. They are running a contest. So make sure you head over to defcon.org and go into the forums and get information. They also have a Twitter. I should probably cue that up.
Right.
Homebrew hardware is about any type of hardware that you have that you're building. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't. It's. Well, I should just say they have all the rules in there, right? The sky's the limit. The Twitter handle for Homebrew Hardware is at Homebrew, HARDA, or I'm sorry, hard or Homebrew, HARDWA1. So it's like hardwa with a 1. So I'm sure if you search for Homebrew Hardware, all one word, you'll find them on Twitter. Speaking of Twitter, you can find us at Hard Hat Brigade, all one word. You can find me, Mr. Bill. I'm at Secure This Now. And Monkey Dragon is
at Monkey Dragon with zeros for the O's. You'll find me.
just like you see on his on the lower corner of his screen. It's M0NKEYDRAG0N. So please check that out and take the time to go through our previous streaming episodes. We keep these on for 14 days. Wow, my neighbor's dogs are going crazy. I apologize for that.
It happens.
I can't win. The weather in San Diego is beautiful, so all the windows are open. Yeah. So anyhow, check us out. Tune in next week. If you have a hard hat and you want to share, definitely let us know. Send us a DM and we'll set it up. We'll bring you on the show. We'll give you as much time as you want to talk about your hard hat, your build, things that you learn, whatever you want. And next week we'll also be covering
tech, different looks like different all the different things you could put on your hard hat. So we're looking at things like antennas, other peripherals, and things. So the stuff that really that catches your eye, I think, is what we're going to be going over there. And bling's important.
Oh, bling. Yes, bling is always important. But yeah, so join us next week, and I'm gonna go outside and hose down some dogs, and so they'll be quiet. Um, oh man, if it's not Zoom, it's my dog trying to get revenge on me. But anyhow, anything you want to add in there, Monkey Dragon?
Um, no, just have fun. If you have questions, reach out. More than happy to help. I will probably try and put something together to kind of go give you a better idea of what some of these tools actually look like with a little bit more clarity. Because I think it'll help better show what's going on when you're doing like crimping the tools where, Mr. Bill had to do stuff with pliers and why a proper tool can be helpful in these situations, help promote to make sure that things are going to work, not just better, but longer too. So, we put a lot of effort into these things, all of us that do, for any project, whether it's physical, whether it's, non-physical. And, we wanted to stand the test of time. So the effort you put in is important, and, we see it. We all see it. So have fun.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to, totally botch things. I mean, what you see here is, I mean, 5, 6, 7, 8 times I've had to redo certain parts of the hat.
Hmm.
I mean, what you can't see is the stickers are covering some of the holes. Um,
Great
and
for that.
yeah, and I mean, this is the place where you want to experiment and you want to get better, and then just use those skills in your daily life, whether it's putting cameras on motorcycles, building PCs, wiring up your car stereo, or whatever.
Hmm.
But or it's your next hard hat, right?
Yeah,
Because it gets
hopefully.
gets a little addicting. But don't limit yourself, and
Hmm.
go out and build, and then share it with everybody.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, everybody have a great, safe week, and we will see you next Saturday, 6 p.m. Pacific. Bye.
See ya.